Hi guys, welcome back. We're covering Module 52 tonight. That's the 3 R's and composting. So as usual, feel free to pause if you need to. You can let me know if you have questions after this. And this directly correlates to the homework assignment that you'll have tonight. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. So learning objectives. So to be able to describe the 3 R's, that's what your homework assignment is tonight, and then understand the process and benefits of composting. Oh, I wonder if you guys can hear this. Oh, it's Bogey.
It's a magic number. Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's a magic number.
You guys can look that up on your own. All right. So the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. So you've probably heard these before. It's a really popular phrase, but it's also called the 3 R's. And basically, this is a look at how to deal with municipal solid waste or solid waste management other than just throwing it in a landfill. And they're actually in order of the best way to deal with municipal solid waste or solid waste to the least best way to deal with municipal solid waste. So we'll go through why this is the best one, why this isn't the best one, and some of the pitfalls of some of these as we go through. Okay, and that'll be enough of our song. Okay. So the first one is to reduce. So this is the first R, and this is the first thing that we should consider doing when we're trying to decrease the amount of solid waste that we're putting on this planet. So this is the first choice. Essentially, by reducing the amount of inputs, you're reducing the outputs. So by reducing the amount of things you're using, you're reducing what's ending up in a landfill. So it's a pretty easy concept right there. Now we do have this idea of source reduction. So this seeks to cut waste by reducing the use of potential waste materials in the early stages of design and manufacture. So essentially, the idea behind reducing is you're reducing from every step. So think about the packaging of something. If you can reduce in the packaging materials that you're using, your end product will eventually have less waste as well. And by reducing the amount of potential waste you're putting into something like packaging products, you're also increasing your energy efficiency because you're using less energy in the production of those materials. You're probably using less of other resources as well, oils, waters, things like that. That's source reduction. Now, there's a lot of ways you can reduce your waste. So there's the source reduction at a corporate level and source reduction at the individual level. So I'll give you the example here of CDs. Now you guys probably don't even own any CDs, but that's good. That's source reduction at the individual level. So way back in the day when Ms. Vonnie would purchase music, she would buy it in a CD, and it always came in one of these plastic cases. It was really big, and then this plastic case was actually wrapped in a thin plastic film as well. And then at some point, they actually switched away from this. So if you were to go buy a CD today, it actually wouldn't have any of this. It would be just the CD in a thin cardboard sleeve, and that would pretty much be it. So that would be source reduction at the corporate level, getting rid of all of this packaging. That's essentially reducing our waste that ends up in a landfill and saving us energy as we manufacture and put out this product. Now, source reduction at the individual level would look like not even purchasing a CD at all. It'd be like downloading it from the internet. So you can have source reduction at a lot of different levels, and of course, different people will have different levels of consumption, right? So source reduction may look different for different people. But essentially consuming less. Now, at the end of this video, there's actually at the end of this PowerPoint, there's actually going to be a video link to the shopping habits of America. And America is obsessed with consumerism. We buy and we buy and we buy and we buy. Mostly because it's easy and it's cheap. So if you go on Amazon and you type in, I don't know, I want a black pair of pants or something like that. You can go on Amazon and search, and you can find a black pair of pants for $3 if you wanted to, right? And you can buy, and now with Amazon Prime, you can ship to your house, and it's cheap. So why not buy? So what do we see a lot of today is people mass consuming and mass buying, and when they don't want it anymore because it was so cheap, because it was really no skin off their back to purchase that item, when they don't want anymore, they're just throwing it away. So it's ending up in a landfill. And it's not just clothing items, it's toaster ovens, it's any little knickknack that you're buying all the time, right? And so, again, the best way to reduce our solid waste, the amount of solid waste that we have, is to stop consuming, is to stop making, right? Now, the downside to reducing, I guess, if there were to be a negative, is sometimes it's looked at as a lower standard of living. So if you can't purchase and consume like you want to, that may have a negative association with meaning that you're living this lower standard of life. But I mean, that's sort of, kind of dig deep on that one. Okay, the next one is to reuse. So this is the second best option of our 3 R's. So reusing or a reuse is using a product or material that was intended to be discarded. So a great example of this would be those single-use plastic water bottles. Those are meant to be drank and tossed. If you refill that numerous times, you are reusing it. Optimally, if you can reuse something without putting any additional energy or resources into that, that would be the best. However, there are a lot of things that can be reused if more energy is put into them. For instance, an old car. Instead of just throwing that car in a junkyard or a landfill and letting it rot out or rust out, you could potentially fix that car. Maybe it needed a new engine and you just needed to do an engine swap. The problem with that is it's going to require energy and time and resources to fix that vehicle, but then it can then be reused. So a good reused item doesn't require any additional energy to put into it. But you can still reuse items, and it would still technically be considered less energy to fix it than it would be to manufacture something new entirely. So even if there's still energy being put in to fix that item, it's less than would be to make something new entirely. Even with this example of a plastic cup, you may have to use fresh water to rinse out the cup. Fresh water is technically a resource that you're wasting, but then you can reuse it and extend the lifespan of that particular cup. But you are using the resource of fresh water. There's also all of these places, things like eBay, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, where you can buy these reusable items. So we've actually created a market for these items that can be sold and reused by people. So when you're done with your dresser and you want a new bedroom set or whatever, instead of tossing it into that landfill, there's now this huge market of people on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist that are actually looking for these products, right? So in the United States, we've actually taken these 3 R's pretty seriously. People have made a dramatic effort to reduce their amount of waste that they're creating because people are more aware of it. They're reusing items, they're purchasing things secondhand from thrift stores or from other people, and it's usually cheaper, which is why people actually do it. The reusing of it, if you need a new dresser, maybe you can't afford one, but you can go on Marketplace and get one for a third of the cost or whatever. So it's sort of allowed us to have a market for reusable items. And the last one, which is sort of the least option that you'd want to take, is recycling, which you probably haven't actually thought of it that way, but recycling is the process by which materials destined to become MSW or municipal solid waste are collected and converted into raw materials that is then used to produce new objects. So you can imagine there's actually a lot of energy that goes into this, because instead of just going into a landfill, there's the energy needed to sort it intentionally and then extract that raw material and then turn it into something new. So there's actually a massive amount of energy that goes into this. And we'll kind of look at why it's a problem. So there's these 2 types of recycling. It can either be a closed loop recycling or an open loop recycling. And an open loop in closed loop recycling, you're recycling a product into the exact same product. And the best example of this is aluminum cans. So if you drink a soda, or a pop if you live somewhere else, or a Coke if you live in the South, whatever you want to call it, if you drink a soda because we live in California, that aluminum can, and you put it in a recycling bin, that aluminum can will be melted down and turned back into a soda can, back into an aluminum can, or whatever you bought. Maybe it's a can of Campbell's soup or something. Aluminum cans get recycled back into aluminum cans. That's closed loop recycling. And this works really well because essentially you could do this forever without ever needing more aluminum. As soon as someone drinks a Coke, it gets recycled, and it turns into another aluminum can again and again and again and again. So it's perpetual. You would never need more aluminum if you just kept this recycling process going. You can do this forever. With open loop recycling, recycling one product turns into a different product. Now, something I've actually seen recently, because we're getting into the summer months and I'm getting all these ads like buy these bathing suits. And of course, the ads that I'm getting are buy these bathing suits that are made from recycled plastic bottles. So you can actually take those. They're actually taking those plastic bottles and converting them into an entirely new product. This is open loop recycling. And something that I've seen is bathing suits. Now, there's other things that you can create here as well, but this is just the one that I've gotten the ads for on my computer. The problem with this is you still need more plastic water bottles. So in the end, you're still going to end up manufacturing more of those plastic water bottles, and then you'll create more of a demand for used plastic or recycled plastic, and you'll have to find more things to be made out of plastic. The problem with this is we're running out of the demand for recycled plastic. So we now have all of this plastic that we're like, oh, look, we're recycling it, we're recycling it, we're recycling it. But in order to recycle it, there has to be a demand for it, right? So the idea of recycling or upcycling is you're either turning it into something new or you're burning it down and creating it back into the same thing it was. But we're running out of things that we can recycle into. There's not this demand, there's not this high demand for recycled products anymore. So what we've actually been doing is sending our recyclables to other countries where the demand is higher. The problem is now these other countries don't want our recyclables anymore because they have way too much of our plastic, because we have way too much plastic in this country. And so one of the common things that people are doing now, and this is actually pretty scary, is they have these ghost ships, is what they call them. And they load up all of our recyclables and some municipal solid waste that we have no idea what to do with. And they put it on this big cargo ship and they send it out into the ocean, and voila. There is nobody manning the ship. There is nobody captaining the ship. It's just a ghost ship. It's floating out into the ocean full of trash in the United States, from the United States. So this is becoming more and more common, and it's becoming a larger problem. Okay, this is showing the closed loop recycling. So we can turn carpet back into carpet, taking those carpet fibers and turning them back into carpet, or like I mentioned, turning plastic bottles into bathing suits. We can turn them into something else. In this case, they're showing you that they turned into a jacket or something like that. Okay. All right. This is showing you how much we've been recycling. Here's our total municipal solid waste that's recycled, and then percent of that actually ends up getting recycled. So it's lower than the amount that we have that's total able to be recycled, but we have increased over the last years in what we're actually recycling. Okay, so in the United States, we've really embraced this idea of recycling pretty enthusiastically because it's been pushed so much. We like the idea that we're helping out the planet in some way, even though we're still drinking our single-use plastic water bottles. It sort of puts our mind at ease that we are recycling them and they're perhaps going to a better cause. We have these programs called zero sort recycling programs, and basically you put all your trash in one container, your big bin, and you put it on the curb, and that gets transferred to a facility where people sort it properly or appropriately. People sort of like this idea because you don't have to, one, worry about sorting your trash. It doesn't take the energy. You don't have to worry about sorting it improperly, right? You get you get sort of all the benefits of recycling, but you don't actually have to do it. The other problem with recycling is the demand really varies. Metals are always in demand because they're really easy to recycle. They can be melted down and turned into something new. Things like glass and paper are not always in demand. So with that, sometimes cities will stop offering recycling for things like glass and paper because there's no longer a demand for it, and they're no longer receiving money for it. So they can't sell it off and get money back for the products that they've been collecting, and then it's sort of a wasted effort. So recycling continues to be kind of this up and down, very volatile process of what is this demand for this particular recycled good, and is it worth the energy to collect it? So some states have cut out recycling in general because they're just not making any money off of it. Now, you guys know Newport is one of the only cities here in South Orange County that actually does recycle. I can tell you the city that I live in, where my trash goes, they do not recycle anything. All of my trash goes into the same bin, and all of that trash then goes into a landfill. So, okay, so next is composting. So we're getting away from the 3 R's, and now we're looking at composting. Composting is something that we're actually looking at doing on the Sage campus next year, specifically vermicomposting, and I'll get into that in a minute. So this is basically taking your organic materials that are municipal solid waste, so things like food or your yard waste if you trim your trees or cut your grass or things like that. Those are all organic materials. And you're going to put them essentially in some type of bin, okay? And basically, you keep them in this bin, and the fact that there's no oxygen present causes the decomposition of this organic material anaerobically meaning without oxygen. And usually you produce some sort of methane gas, but it decomposes on its own, essentially. It breaks down. So the reason we like this is because municipal solid waste takes up a lot of space in a landfill. So if we can take out a portion of that, a good portion of it is food and yard waste. If we can eliminate that from the landfill, we end up with a lot more space in our landfill, and we can very quickly break down food and yard waste. So essentially, you are going to create this humus by decomposing under these controlled conditions to produce this very organic, rich material that you can then sell off and put in your soil, which is what a lot of people who compost at home do, is add it to their soil to make it more nutrient rich. And basically, it enhances the cation exchange capacity, which you guys learned about, the amount of positively charged ions in there, and it makes the soil more nutrient rich. The things that you can put in a composting bin: vegetables, vegetable byproducts, animal manure, yard waste, paper fiber that's not destined for recycling, all of that can go in here. It's really important what you end up putting in your compost bin, because one, you don't want it to smell, you don't want to attract vermin, you don't want to attract flies, things like that. You got to be really careful about how you compost. So a couple things that are important. So rotating your compost, so allowing for aeration in equal parts of the material. We actually have one like this on campus where you spin this big barrel and it allows for everything to sort of mix around and decompose evenly. And then there's vermicomposting, which is using worms to break down the organic matter a little bit further. In order for decomposition to happen quickly, you need to have this 30-to-1 ratio of carbon to nitrogen. This will support the most microbial activity and support the fastest breakdown or decomposition of that organic matter. The best way to do this is through layers. So you're going to layer your wet materials with dry materials. Your wet materials are going to be things like your vegetables or your greens is what they would call that, and then remains with dry leaves and sticks, and they would call that the brown layer. So dry leaves layered with your green vegetables, so wet with dry, and that'll actually help you achieve that ratio of carbon to nitrogen that's super important, and not make your compost too wet, but not make it too dry. You want to continually be rotating it to allow for aeration. And for the most part, your compost actually probably won't smell. It's a common misconception about it. It starts to smell if you put things like meat and dairy in there. So you don't want to have things like eggs or sandwich meat or things like that. That will be too, that is what will start to attract the smell. Now, if your compost gets if it gets too wet, that's when you start to get the breakdown, the decomposition that starts producing methane. And methane is what smells bad, and that's what you don't want with your decomposition process. There's also commercial composting farms, so they're basically doing exactly that process, but on a large scale, where they take their waste, they'll separate out what's compostable in there. Everything else gets sent to a landfill. The compostable material gets put in these big troughs, essentially, and covered with soil, and they turn it over. And how long you keep your compost depends. So a period of 30 days to 1 year kind of depends on what you're composting, how large your pile is. They'll constantly turn these over to allow for aeration, and then once it's allowed to cure, they'll sell it and they'll use it somewhere. So to enhance soil, whatever, whoever wants to buy it. So the downsides to composting, you do really need some space. I mean, you could do it anywhere. You could do it in your college dorm room if you wanted to. Your roommate might not like that, but you could. But you do need some space to make it happen, like an apartment patio. You could potentially make it happen. You just have to be really aware of the smells and things like that. It takes time to sort through your waste. You have to be conscious of what you're throwing away versus what you're not. If you don't take care of it, if it gets too wet, if you're not turning it over, it can very easily start to produce really bad smells, turn rancid very quickly. So you do have to maintain it. And then, of course, there's always the possibility of attracting flies, ants, rodents, things like that. This is the video I was talking about, America's Shopping Addiction. If you want to watch it, you can. It's not entirely a part of the curriculum. I just think it's interesting to look at how consumerism has affected America and how it's increased our municipal solid waste problems. So give it a watch if you want, but you don't have to. All right, guys, that's the end. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll do my best to help you out. Thanks.